By 1983, the future could not have looked more promising for 28-year-old Bill Gates and Microsoft. The personal computer business was booming, and there was an ever-increasing hunger for software. Bill Gates and Paul Allen were emerging as the crown princes of the personal computer age. But in the midst of the breathtaking rise of their company, they were stunned by some terrible news. Paul Allen, Bill's friend and partner since high school, was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, a form of cancer.
It did give Bill kind of a perspective that he didn't have before. You know, he'd always been very, very hard driving, very demanding, and this may have helped him understand a little bit better in terms of what other people go through.
Allen's disease went into remission 1 year later, but he would never again take full part in the day-to-day business of Microsoft. For two men in their early 30s who created a company of global significance and made millions, it was the end of an era.
I think history's going to show that their partnership really was an incredible dynamic. I often compare it to the Beatles, Lennon and McCartney. The songs they wrote together are the ones that pretty much we remember and get played over and over again. They were great songwriters individually. You know, we still hear their songs that they wrote on their own. But somehow together they were even greater than the sum of their parts. And Paul and Bill were like that.
By 1984, Bill Gates had become the singular face of Microsoft. In April of that year, he was heralded by Time magazine as the quintessential representative of a new breed of businessman. One who understood both nuts and bolts technology and corporate strategy.
When you work with Bill, you can see that in almost any meeting you're in or anything you're discussing, Bill instantly puts together a profile of all of the cases. What about this? 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 He almost builds this checklist of everything that can possibly happen in his head in a very structured way, and then he runs through it.
Protect mode file system, the super advanced fat file system.
Microsoft was often referred to as a math camp, where Gates' demanding management style kept the creative process churning and sometimes set off heated confrontations.
The early Gates would challenge just about anything. He'd call things the stupidest idea you'd ever heard. And part of it was to test, to see, well, okay, if you disagree, you've got to convince me that it's not the stupidest idea in the world.
A constant challenging of ideas was required to stay on top in an ever-changing industry. Gates surrounded himself with a team that shared his relentless work ethic.
Certainly when we are working to release a software product, we are sleepless in Seattle. There's a story about Bill from Miriam Lubau, his assistant. She was new to the company. She came in one morning and she didn't know if she should call police because there was this guy sleeping under a desk. But it turned out to be Bill.
The effort was paying off. Microsoft posted more than $140 million in sales in 1985. In 1986, Gates introduced Microsoft Windows. It would become the company's signature program. Critics quickly noted that in its use of a mouse and icons, it bore more than a passing resemblance to the Apple Macintosh operating system, considered to be the most user-friendly.
If you know how to point, you already know how to use it. Macintosh, the computer for the rest of us.
Apple had given Gates full access to their technology while he was working on new software for the Macintosh computer. Gates advised Apple early on that they should license their software. But Apple was more interested in selling computers than software. They ignored the suggestion. Once again, Gates took advantage of an opening and ran with it.
In this industry, we compete and we collaborate at the same time. Bill once had a conversation with me, says, you know, I'm a competitor, so even though I'm a friend, don't tell me information that you don't want me to use against you, because I'm going to compete with you, and if you tell me something that's useful in competing, I'm going to use that information.
Apple decided that Gates was not going to take a bite out of their business and threatened to sue over Windows. Gates, in turn, said he would withhold Microsoft software Apple desperately needed for its computers. In the end, Microsoft overpowered Apple in the courts.
Eventually, Microsoft prevailed by showing that even though there were similarities in the way that the two computers operated, each individual function of Windows was markedly different from each individual function of the Macintosh.
Even though the first version of Windows was far from perfect, it gave Microsoft a new financial and creative base. In 1986, Bill Gates took his company public. He held 45% of the stock, which made him a billionaire at the age of 31. Still, Gates never felt secure about the status of his company.
He doesn't want to fail. And when you have that kind of a fear, when you're always looking in your rearview mirror to see who might be, creeping up to do in Microsoft on a given day, it just consumes him, and it makes him certainly the most competitive human being in the personal computer industry. He's driven. It's white-hot intensity.
Gates was also gaining a reputation for being ruthless, and some powerful forces began to line up against him. Now that PCs had taken off, IBM chose to make a big push with its own operating system to replace DOS, which it licensed from Microsoft. It was called OS/2.
We were concerned whether we could weather the storm, so to speak, especially given the fact that this was a big storm. IBM, a very powerful company, a lot of software people, a lot of cash, a lot of resolve to potentially put Microsoft out of the operating system business.
Ironically, Microsoft played a role in developing OS/2. But Bill Gates was not about to abandon his own software. He decided to stake his company's future and his own reputation on the Windows software his team continued to upgrade, even if it meant losing IBM as his biggest customer. On May 22, 1990, Microsoft launched Windows 3.0. This new and improved version swiftly became a bestseller. Ultimately, OS/2 failed in the marketplace, leaving Microsoft with a virtual monopoly on operating systems for PCs. Now the Federal Trade Commission began looking at claims that Gates was using this dominance in operating systems to cut off competition by cutting prices on Microsoft products. It seemed Microsoft's mild-mannered chairman was gaining a seek and destroy image.
Bill Gates is not a brutal guy. He just needs to win. And he's willing to win, gracefully or non-gracefully. Doesn't matter. A win is still a win.
Predatory pricing was not the only charge leveled at Microsoft. In 1993, the Justice Department began a new investigation. Gates would have to face one of his most formidable opponents, the United States government.